Hi, welcome back to Social Studies. We're going to look at the A2 now. And good news, we've already talked about many of the skills that you need in terms of unpacking significant language. And the quote that you're going to get for the A2 is typically shorter than you get for your quotes for an A1. So there's less on the page. I'm going to put this on. And let's get started. So we have three folders. The blue one is the economic, the pink one is political, and the purple one is a combination of economic, political, and social. To some extent, I could almost put all three or all of the A2s in here. Almost every A2 could be a combination. There are some words, though, like self-interest, that may lean more towards the economic side of the course, but let's be honest, you do have a political self-interest. You do have a social self-interest. I did start recording this. Yeah, I did. Yeah, at the end, I'm going to be like, wait a minute. No, you do have a political, you do have a social, you do have an economic self-interest, but the term self-interest is mostly associated with the invisible hand, with capitalism. So an essay may seem a little less sophisticated if you ignore the obvious, right? If you just totally omit that. So I'm saying that almost all of these could be in the purple folder, which is a combination. But for the sake of the interpreter, or the sake of the review here, I do have three different folders. The question was asked before, if the sources for A1 are, say, economic, does that mean the essay is political? It means the essay probably should have some political nuances, then yes. So if you have three economic sources tomorrow for A1, and in A1, typically they do still stay with that same kind of unit, then the essay should be from the other unit. I'm not saying that you can't use some overlap. That's why we have this purple folder with all these samples, but I'm saying that it should give you an opportunity to test the entire course. All right, so the purple folder has lots of overlap, like the term underprivileged. Could be economic underprivileged, could be political underprivileged, could be social. The phrase, the strength of a country, that's an economic term. But you could argue that a political, like a democracy, could be a sign of a strong country. Or social equality could be a strong country. Government support, are we talking about economic support or political support? A strong leader, is that a political statement or a strong leader that's making strong economic decisions? Stability could be an economic term. You know, stabilizing people's income, but it could also be talking about political stability. So we do have some terms that could be economic, political, and social. Times of crisis, government control, protecting citizens. So we have the possibility of an economic paper tomorrow, a political paper, some kind of combination of economics, political, and social. There is a fourth possibility about imposing liberalism. We've seen it once in 2011. We haven't seen it since. I would say you have a 1% chance at best of seeing it. If you have something like that, basically it's saying, should we ever impose our ideologies on other countries? We want you to talk about Afghanistan or the war in Iraq, rebuilding Japan at the end of World War II, maybe stopping the spread of communism in Vietnam, containment, Truman Doctrine, things like that. Let's look at some recurring ideas. So some recurring ideas that I see in essay prompts is the if this then what argument. If this, some kind of insight into the nature of mankind or the insight into the purpose of government, then what? You know, if citizens are rational, then what kind of government should we have? If citizens are irrational, emotional, if citizens are ignorant, if citizens are apathetic, then what is the ideal government? If this, then what? I want you to think about the if this, then what when you write essays. If this, then what? If we have racism, if we have violence in the streets, then what kind of relationship with government should we have? What kind of relationship with the legal system and the justice system should we have? Regardless of the theme, the assignment is the same. So what is the assignment? First step is to analyze the source. Analyzing the source is not a 3-sentence assignment. It is not a half a page assignment. Your analysis of source should be in that page length range. So how do you lengthen your analysis? Break the language down. Just like we did with an A1, you're going to break the language down. You're going to look at the language, you're going to read through the A2 prompt once, and then you're going to go back, break down the language, look for key rocks, look for key phrases. One thing you're going to look for is there a problem that inspired the source? Is the source a reaction to some kind of flaw or problem in society? And then the solution is the ideological perspective of the source. So the source is going to show you a problem and a solution. And we want you to talk about the ideological perspective of the source. And what is the ideological perspective? It is whatever solution that they're offering to solve the problem. And we're going to connect that solution to liberalism. Same thing we did with an A1. Is it challenging liberalism or is it supporting liberalism? So for example, using the blue folder, we can look at the following source. The elite have too much control over society. It is imperative that the government enact reforms to guarantee a decent quality of life for all. So I read through it once, just kind of get a big picture of what it is. Then I might go back and I'll unpack it. Bring a highlighter. Bring a pen, bring a pencil. Bring something that you can highlight key sources. So just like we did with the A1, we can unpack the source first by reading it as a whole, then unpacking it key term or key phrase at a time. The source presents a perspective in response to a crisis within some economic systems. I know it's economic because I read through it. And it talks about a decent quality of life for all, and I'm inferring that they mean an economic life. And then I unpack it even more. So my first sentence might be, the source presents a perspective in response to a crisis within some economic systems. And then my next part of my interpretation, I'm going to figure out why did they use the term elite. More specifically, it explicitly targets the elite as the source of the crisis. So do we see that in this source? That it's targeting the elite as the source of the crisis. So looking at the source now, it says the elite have too much control over society. It is imperative that the government enact reforms to guarantee a decent quality of life. Can you see how the elite are the cause of the problem? So my first sentence, the source presents a perspective in response to a crisis within some economic systems. My next sentence, more specifically, it explicitly targets the elite as the source of the crisis. Worth noting is the source does not offer any elaboration on who the elite are or what shared qualities or values do they share. That qualifies or quantifies them as elite. So once I've unpacked that key term, now I'm going to say, well, here's the key term that they have, but maybe there's a vagueness surrounding the definition of that word. They haven't defined it. We can infer what they mean. We can infer that the elite is a term associated with the unequal accumulation and distribution of wealth and power, an influence that often results from wealth. Recently, the term 1% or even the 0.1% has been used to describe these elite individuals, some worth in excess of $100 billion. Within modern societies, we often also have a social elite, people that we admire in a lot higher status and more privileges than the rest. We often admire them as a result of the influence that they offer us, the social influence that they offer us. Politically, many nations have an elite based upon the lottery of birth, or maybe even their specific role within the system. Even in a liberal democracy such as Canada, to some extent, those elected become the elite because they'll have more opportunities to shape policies than the voters who voted them in. So I have a whole paragraph here just saying this is what the word elite means. So you can't tell me that your analysis of source is 3 sentences long. You're getting a P. You're getting 20%. You failed your essay because you can't get above S on anything else. So you need a longer analysis. How do you get a longer analysis? You need to break down the significance of language. The elite. I just wrote a paragraph on the second word. And the. Am I going to write a paragraph on the word the? So, the source presents a perspective in response to crises on economic systems. More specifically, it targets the elite. It doesn't tell me who the elite are. This is who the elite could be. The next phrase mentions has too much control. You would then talk about what that means. It doesn't say the elite should have no control, but it does state that there is a point where it becomes too much. So I want to be precise in clarifying how much control should the elite have from the perspective of this source. It's not saying the elite should have no control. This isn't a communist source saying let's kill the elite, but they're saying they have too much control. So we can infer that the source is okay with the elite having some control, but not too much control. The next phrase reads, it is imperative. It says, it is imperative that the government enact reforms. Think about the last time you used the word imperative in conversation. Probably not often. The word imperative has a tone attached to it. I would think that the next logical step for you would be, as we're working through the source line by line, key phrase by key phrase, we've circled the word imperative, and we're going to say that, if something is imperative, there exists a sense of urgency to resolve or address it. That's what the word imperative means. Maybe I looked it up tomorrow during the exam, and I'm like, oh crap, what does imperative mean? This is what it means. That's the dictionary definition. There's a sense of urgency to resolve it. So if something is imperative, there exists a sense of urgency to resolve it. Therefore, the usage of the term shows an urgent tone. So now I have the tone. I have the problem. I have some vagueness around the language. The next phrase is that the government enact reforms. This is where the source offers a solution, right? So now I can connect that solution to an ideology, connect it to values, assumptions, and key concepts, like the rights, roles, and responsibilities of citizens and government. Connect those things to liberalism. That's the assignment. So once I get to the solution, I need to connect the solution to these are the values the solution is promoting, or these are the values the solution is attacking. These values are connected to these assumptions about how society should work or does work. These values are connected to certain roles of government or citizens. And those things should connect to liberalism. So as the source suggests that through government reforms one can address the problem, we could label the source as modern liberal, providing freedom through government. Depending upon the specific reforms enacted and the degree to which we embrace collectivist principles in the process, the ideological perspective could be socialist. But it's not communist because it's saying freedom through government. So I've clarified the perspective. You could briefly introduce some evidence to further the perspective. Here's a problem. Some students will now write a whole paragraph about evidence. You're not writing a paragraph defending the perspective. You might just introduce evidence to say, to continue the perspective presented, they would point to this or this. So, when the source suggests government reforms could address too much elite control, it could be referencing the need for legislation, for greater regulation of the elite within the financial sector of the United States. If the time period of the quote is much earlier, the reforms could be calling for the factory acts to control the robber barons. I have some evidence to further the perspective, but I didn't write pages and pages about the factory acts. I just connected them to the idea of regulating the elite. Or I didn't write pages and pages about the financial meltdown of 2008, but I connected that with the idea that maybe the elite had too much control. So far, we have read through it once and said this is the theme. It's economics. And then we have started highlighting key terms. Elite. This is why they're using the word elite. This is what it means. It's vague, so we have to unpack that when they say this, we can infer that they meant that. Then we try to figure out what's the problem here. And then we begin to look at the solution. And in the solution, we're going to see values and we're going to see roles of government. So within the solution here, we see the role of government that is modern liberal. So they value government intervention in our lives. They value cooperation. They value common interest. Another step that most students don't do that you could do to add to get beyond an S up to PF and E is explore the significance of the source. The source has a problem, a solution, and a goal. So what's the goal of the source? The goal of this source is to ensure everybody has a decent quality of life. So somewhere in my analysis, I've identified, here's the problem that inspired the source. Here's the solution or the perspective that they offer, but here's the ultimate goal that they're trying to get to. A decent quality of life for all. Again, that language is vague. So because the language is vague, now I can begin to talk about the vision of society surrounding the language. How some people would define a decent quality of life differently than others. Talk about the values and assumptions that go along with that. So to a collectivist, a decent life is achieved from cooperation, sharing wealth, working together towards the common good. Whereas an individualist like Adam Smith would argue that a decent life is attained through one's free pursuit of their own self-interest. A fascist like S0cial would argue that a decent life is only possible by submitting to the will of the state and serving state interests. A communist like Marx would argue that a decent life is achieved when we stop living for ourselves and rather work for the sake of others. That's my cast of characters right there, paying off. I show a division of society surrounding the goal. That's something you should be able to do tomorrow. Is whatever the goal is, people are going to see different paths to get there. They might all agree that that's a goal that we should get to, but they disagree on how to get there. So after you explore the division of society, it's natural that we expect to hear from you, and that's your thesis. So in summary, in the analysis part, we've identified the general theme. We've identified the problem that the source is exposing. We have connected the problem to liberalism. We've identified a solution, connect that to values and assumptions, roles of government, roles of citizens. We can talk about the solution's connection to a goal and the division of society surrounding that goal. One other step that you could talk about before you get to your thesis is, if left unaddressed, the problem expressed in the source could lead to what? That's the significance of the source. And I would argue that that logically would be the sentence leading up to your thesis. So you've unpacked the source, you talk about their perspective, you talk about how others disagree. Now you're going to say, but we need to find a solution, because if we don't, it's the death of birth. Here's the solution. That's your thesis statement. So logical order here. It's very convincing. Unpack the source, talk about the division of society. So some approaches to essay writing. Some students in the province will be taught that in their body, they should have a paragraph where they argue against themselves. Do that before your thesis. Do that in the division of society part. Once you get to your thesis, you need to defend your position. If you are Johnny Depp, you don't want your lawyer to say, you know what, maybe my client is guilty. Maybe Amber is correct. And then spend a week, addressing that. Your lawyer only has so much time and attention of the judge and jury. You don't want your lawyer, your advocate, advocating for the position that isn't yours. Once you've stated your position, defend it. Don't deviate from it. Depending upon what essays you write in university, you might be taught a different approach because it's a different type of essay. This is an argumentative, persuasive essay. Once you've created a statement, stick to it. Do your division of society before your thesis, and then everything after your thesis should be connected to your thesis. Now, if you want an argument that allows you to say, but there's some good points here and some good points here, create a thesis that allows you to do that. Although capitalism is a great creator of wealth, it is not an equal distributor of it. Therefore, we need this. Now you have a body where you can kind of meander around. But don't argue against yourself. If you state capitalism is a great creator of wealth, and then your first body paragraph says, maybe capitalism is not a great creator of wealth, you just failed your essay. In class, maybe I'll be kind and try to find a way to make sure you don't fail. A marker that doesn't know you, they're going to say, you're off topic now. You're arguing against yourself. You failed your essay. So if you want to explore the division of society surrounding how we should respond to the problem and get to the goal of the source, do that before your thesis. Don't do it after. So one of the weaknesses that students have across the province is argumentation. You guys had a term project where you had all the essays that we've ever done, and you had to break down the sources. And I would argue that the essay prompts that have been used in the past, you could use them as arguments tomorrow on your essay. Every essay prompt that's ever been used is an argument. Many of them fit together. And those that fit together you could use to further your argument. So for example, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th sets in the blue folder, we can combine those sources into one argument. Topic sentence could be, a government-controlled economy is essential in order to promote equality. And then you could add the other arguments of those other sources. Any movement towards neoconservative policies will result in increased inequality in society. A society based on social interest and the accumulation of wealth ignores the disadvantaged members. The state must take an active role to serve the greater good. An economic system based on private property turns citizens against each other. The interests of those who have are in conflict with the interests of those who have not. All of those are just old essay prompts. They all could be arguments that you put into your essay tomorrow. Those are excellent arguments. And all of those fit together in one argument about what kind of economic system is best for us. So if you're a student that has difficulty stating arguments, we have an archive of 21 old arguments that we could pool some together and say, these are arguments in favor of capitalism. These are arguments in favor of socialism. Guess what? We did a term project on arguments in favor against ideologies. That term project gets you ready for tomorrow. Your cast of characters gets you ready for tomorrow. Your language gets you ready for tomorrow. The most important thing that we did this year were your term projects. So make sure you look those over. In between each parts of that argument, you just put some evidence to further the argument, and then you'd have a brilliant essay. So, response to the source. State your thesis. Now, this is what a thesis must look like. You know, when we're in Social 10, and a couple of you were in my Social 10 class, we talked about although, but, therefore essays. This is where you go although, and this is the part of the source you agree with, and then but, this is what you don't agree with, and then therefore, that's your solution. Those are, sophisticated thesis statements, and I'd love to see those, but you don't have to have an although, but, therefore. You could have a thesis statement as simple as, we should embrace the perspective of the source completely. And you could still get 100%. Even though that's not a sophisticated thesis, it's what you do after that can help you out. But I'm going to show you an example of a more sophisticated thesis that gives me lots to talk about in the body. So, being that your body is determined by the promises made in your thesis statement, then if you can have a comprehensive thesis statement, that sets you up for success. So, when I'm creating a thesis statement, what should I be thinking about? Go back to the source, look at the words that you've circled, and how do you respond to them? The elite have too much power over society. My thesis should be taking perspective whether I agree with that or not. It is imperative that the government enact reforms. Is it? I need to respond to that to guarantee a decent quality of life for all. Should we have that? So your thesis is a response to the claims, assumptions within the source. So you've highlighted these are the things that the source is saying. Now you get a chance to respond to them. That's going to be in your body. So your thesis to be on topic needs to respond to the assumptions in there. So here's my thesis for that source. Although the source is correct in identifying a decent quality of life for all as the ultimate goal of society, it incorrectly places blame on the elite for being an obstacle that is preventing the achievement of this goal. Therefore, in order to unlock a decent quality of life for all, instead of inviting what could be inefficient and corrupt government reforms into our lives, we need to allow the proven power of capitalism to create more wealth. Once that wealth is created, then capitalists should have the choice to assist in elevating the quality of life of their workers. So I basically took a industrial paternalist perspective. saying, yeah, you're right, you know what, everybody should have a decent quality of life. Capitalism is going to create a lot of wealth. Government's going to be horrible. Keep them out of it. Let the capitalists help the workers. Now, that's a very lengthy thesis, a very complex thesis. Sometimes less is more. Everything you say in your thesis is a promise that you're going to put into your body. If in my body, I never talk about how a decent quality of life for all is the ultimate goal of society, then I should fail my essay. If I suggest to you that the Edmonton Oilers are going to win the Stanley Cup next year, because they're going to have better goaltending, they have the top 2 forwards in the league, and let's, for argument's sake, say that Darnell Nurse is going to have a breakout year and he's going to be the next Chris Pronger. That's what we need for my argument to be correct, right? If that's my theory, we're going to win the cup because we have better goaltending, we have the top 2 forwards, and Nurse is due for a breakout year, and he's going to have a Pronger-like year of dominance. If I write an essay where I'm like, Campbell this, Campbell that, goaltending this, better than Koskinen that, check mark, I did that part. And then the next paragraph, I'm like, Leon's great, Connor's great, forwards are great, check mark, I've done that. And then I go and talk about how the color blue is my favorite color, and the Oilers have a really nice blue jersey next year. Have I finished my thesis? No. I didn't talk about Darnell Nurse at all. I should fail the essay. You guys do that far too often. You leave some kind of like, this is a promise that I'm going to make. You make a promise in your thesis statement, and then you ignore it. So as you're writing your body, go back to your thesis and say, what am I supposed to be talking about here? What are my promises now? And my thesis statement I have there is logically broken up into several paragraphs. A decent quality of life for all should be the ultimate goal, paragraph 1. The elite are not an obstacle, paragraph 2. If we invite the government in, it's going to create new problems, paragraph 3. In order to ensure equality of life for all, we need to embrace capitalism, paragraph 4. Once we do that, then capitalists should have the choice to help others, paragraph 5. The thesis statement creates the paragraphs. And yes, there were 5 based on that, not 3, because we're not writing a English Language Arts 8 essay where it's a 5-paragraph essay. There's no magic number. You could get 100% on this essay and only have 2 body paragraphs. Or maybe you have 5 body paragraphs. It depends upon how logically you break your thesis down. So there is no magic number. No magic number. The only other time that you're going to see your thesis, so thesis, body paragraphs are parts of your thesis, and then in the conclusion, first sentence, restate your thesis. And then in your conclusion, basically sum up your argumentation. Could you get 100% and have no conclusion? Yes, you could. So if it's 2:30 tomorrow, and you're like, do I spend a half an hour making a conclusion, or spend a half an hour adding more argumentation to my body? Add more argumentation to your body. Ideally, you would have a conclusion, but not at the expense of making your body better. Your conclusion is only a summary of your argumentation you've already made. So technically, that shouldn't elevate your argumentation mark. Unless you're introducing new argumentation, which you shouldn't do in a conclusion, because you don't conclude new things. So if you are caught in a time trap, and you're like, well, I only have a half an hour left, should I spend a half an hour on my conclusion? Spend it on the body, and then in the end, just make a conclusion where you copy and paste your thesis statement, and maybe copy and paste your topic sentences for each body paragraph. That takes you 2 minutes instead of 30, and you're done. You notice how I said copy and paste your topic sentences from each body paragraph? If you can. It's not like life or death. I don't want you sitting there tomorrow and be like paralyzed because you can't write because you're stuck on how to do it. But if you can, your topic sentences should be a statement of argument, not an introduction to evidence. Every paragraph in your body is like a mini essay that begins with a mini thesis, which is a statement of purpose, not a... The Great Depression started in 1929. This isn't a report. You just started a report. This is a persuasive essay. You're not persuading me on anything there. You know, it's not up to debate what year the Great Depression began. So you have a thesis statement that should be logically divided into supporting arguments. each supporting argument has a body paragraph. And the supporting argument is the topic sentence of that body paragraph. Let argumentation be the vehicle that guides your essay. Now, in terms of the defense of your argumentation, in terms of your evidence, let's look at the descriptors. An S is generalized, straightforward. So you generally know that the difficulties that Americans faced during the Great Depression ended up showing the need for government intervention in the economy. You generally know that because you worded it like I just did. That's an S. How do you get from an S to a PF? Show me something specific. Give me a specific example of a flaw within the system that demanded some kind of relief, recovery, reform, and then link that to the Keynesian economic policy introduced by FDR that provided it. More details will get your evidence from an S to a PF to an E. More details, more quantifiable numbers. Adding quotes, like the one I used in the A1 review from Benjamin Franklin. How precisely does this student know the content? Most students generally get things, especially summer students, because it goes by so quickly. So how do we know that you're not an S student? Show us some sound and specific evidence. And have the evidence to be judiciously attached to an argument. So if you're making an argument that the irrational nature of mankind, so because mankind can be irrational by nature, the economy must be regulated by the state. And then people are like, well, what evidence are they going to use? Boom, tulip mania. Boom, buying on the margin. Boom, housing bubble. All very judiciously chosen. If this, then what? These are elements within the economy that warrant government intervention. A Prezi that I created for you that you looked at that could build an economic essay for you tomorrow. So that's an A2. An A2 begins with an analysis of the source. You break it down key phrase by key phrase, word by word. You look at the source is generally about this theme. The economic role of government, the political role of citizens. Within that theme, the source is introducing this problem. Now, maybe they're introducing a problem the elite have too much control, but they haven't defined elite. So then we unpack that. And then they offer this solution. The solution is attached to these values, pages 71 to 85. They're either challenging some or they're celebrating some. And this is how it connects to liberalism. Now, this is the goal of the source. Not everybody thinks that this path will get to the goal. These people would say these are better paths. But this is why we need to get to the goal, significance. This is how I think we get to the goal. And then you have a body where it's like, here's this argument in favor of what I want. There's this argument, this argument, this argument. And then you just have, judiciously chosen evidence attached to those arguments. And if you have troubles getting to the arguments, we have inventories of arguments, right? I gave you examples of these term projects. And we already have arguments for and against all the key ideologies. Commit some to memory for tomorrow and use them in your essay. It's as simple as that. Are there any essays in any of these three that you want me to break down with you before we take our break and get started with the redo? Are there any that you want me to say, I don't know how I'd break this one down? So pick one if you want.